In today's political climate, we've all heard of immigrants. It seems to be a hot topic. Politicians are talking about immigration, we read the news about border controls, or we might even know an immigrant ourselves. But what is a refugee exactly? Aren't they the same thing as an immigrant? There seems to be an idea that immigrants and refugees are essentially the same thing. Often they are lumped together into the same group when discussing border control and policies surrounding immigration. Despite their perceived sameness, their experiences and circumstances are quite different. In fact, the United Nations recognizes a refugee as someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. This definition was established in the 1951 Refugee Convention and has since been recognized as a key legal document in international law. In other words, while immigrants leave for better opportunities, whether that is for better education or economic opportunities, refugees often feel that there are no other options but to relocate from their nation. For fear of their safety, refugees flee from their homes, their culture, and the comfort of the loved ones that they are leaving behind. As a Model UN delegate, I spend a large portion of my free time talking about refugee crises, asylum seekers, and the global problems that initially force people away from their homes. These issues can range anywhere from climate disasters, political dictatorships, extreme economic downturn, or outright political unrest. In every conference, it can be widely agreed upon that refugees are in need of conventional aid like water, food, medical supplies, and shelter. But what doesn't get talked about enough is how language itself becomes a barrier, not just to communication, but to justice, survival, and dignity. Meaning that language is so much more than just talking to one another. It can mean life or death. Here's a good example of what can happen for a refugee experiencing language barriers. Though this example is purely hypothetical, it's a great way to understand the purely complex issue that is going on every single day. A 16-year-old Rohingya girl, Amina, is escaping Myanmar's suspected genocide. When her village was raided during a military operation in the Rakhine state, her family was taken and her home was burned down. Amina fled on foot to Bangladesh, eventually making it onto a boat to Malaysia. Months later, she arrived in Australia, where she applied for asylum or the ability to reside in Australia as a refugee. If she stays in Myanmar, it is likely that she will face great bodily harm from her government, who is committing genocide on her peoples and doesn't even recognize Amina as a person. Here's the deal, though. Amina only speaks Rohingya. Rohingya has no official status in Myanmar, as the government does not even acknowledge the Rohingya as an officially recognized group of people and seeks to exterminate their culture and their just mere existence. Australia has no certified interpreters of the language, and there are very limited written resources for other personnel to help Amina. When Amina finally sat down for her asylum interview, the interpreter spoke standard Burmese, a language she barely understands and associates with the very people who persecuted her, kidnapped her family, and burned down her house. She's clearly confused, nervous, and very traumatized. When asked by the interpreter, "Why did you leave Myanmar?" she says, "They came to our village. I was afraid." But the interpreter paraphrases it as, "She left because she was scared of war." No mention of the ethnic cleansing, the military, or the kidnapping of her family. The interpreter in her case file goes on to say, no specific details about persecution, unclear motivation for asylum, possibly economic migrant. This simple misunderstanding made by the interpreter might cost Amina her asylum claim. She might have to return back to a country that does not recognize her peoples, kidnapped her family, and is committing genocide on her ethnicity. So this was a purely hypothetical situation, but this also happens in real life. A ProPublica investigation from 2019 found that U.S. immigration courts routinely failed to provide interpreters for Mam-speaking asylum seekers from Guatemala. According to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, also known as the UN Refugee Agency, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras have some of the highest rates of violence in the world. Gang violence, political turmoil, threats, extortion, persecution, and sexual violence have forced hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes in search of safety and a better life. Here's a little bit more background information. Mam is an indigenous Mayan language spoken in the northwest highlands of Guatemala and eastern central Mexican border with Guatemala. In total, it has about 600,000 total speakers. 591,000 of those speakers are Guatemalan. Mam is not mutually intelligible with Spanish, meaning that Mam and Spanish have little to no similarities in any aspect of their language. A Spanish speaker cannot understand a Mam speaker, and vice versa. Now back to what happened in one documented case. A Guatemalan man fleeing gang violence tried to explain his situation during an asylum interview. He did not speak Spanish fluently, only Mam. The interpreter provided by the court spoke Spanish, not Mam, meaning that the interpreter and the Guatemalan man could not understand each other. However, the judge and the attorney assumed that the man could quote-unquote get by in Spanish and conducted the hearing anyway. As a result, his claims were misunderstood, and the judge denied asylum on grounds of insufficient evidence or inconsistencies. He was forced to go back to where he did not feel safe, in a place where the UN Refugee Agency has even cited that it is dangerous due to gang violence. Now, this video isn't just for MUN nerds like me, people who like to discuss international politics. If you're a college student, a student in high school, just someone who's ever had to navigate a foreign system or language, and even have empathy for those seeking a better, safe life, this matters to you too. Refugees are often denied fair treatment simply because of how they speak. In asylum hearings, a lack of qualified interpreters can literally make the difference between safety and deportation. It's a genuine humanitarian issue. So, are there international laws protecting refugees from this kind of linguistic discrimination? Technically, yes, there are. Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone is entitled to all rights and freedoms, regardless of the language that they use. But enforcement of this recommendation? That's another story. And while the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has guidelines recommending the use of interpreters, they're not legally binding, and countries can and do choose to ignore this recommendation. So what can we do if the United Nations or other international bodies can't really make countries use interpreters? Well, you could start by educating yourself and others about this specific linguistic injustice. By teaching others and bringing awareness to this issue, you can put pressure on institutions like the U.S. justice system to provide interpretation for refugees seeking a safer future. A great place to start educating yourself are the CLEAR Global and the International Association for Conference Interpreters, or the AIIC. These are both great organizations that work really hard to bring awareness to this issue. CLEAR Global works to provide translation and interpretation services in humanitarian settings and crises where displacement is common. They also advocate for refugees seeking language equity and equal treatment in asylum settings. AIIC works to provide standards for interpreters, especially those working in refugee and asylum contexts. They also advocate for the rights of interpreters providing essential services. To learn more about their missions and the work that they do, visit their websites at clearglobal.org and aiic.org. Finally, as you continue on in your careers, maybe you're studying law, policy, or linguistics, think critically about who your systems are leaving behind. Think about Amina, or the thousands of refugees who deserve a better chance and a safe community. You can be the positive change in the world, a world where language doesn't stop you from achieving the future that you want and that you deserve.